Hey everybody, what's going on? I am Jamie Dawn, your evolutionary revolutionary astrologer, bringing you your celestial wisdom for the week of April 2nd through the 9th of 2023. But I'm going to touch on last week as well. And part of that, I didn't record a celestial wisdom video for those of you who follow me because there was a lot of things going on in my own personal life that I needed to deal with, and it just got away from me. So, but I do want to talk about it because I feel as though all of us can relate to it. And we have this coming week on April 5th into April 6th, we have a full moon in Libra, which is all about relationships. If you have a pretty big Libra influence in your chart, you're feeling this really closely. Not to mention, we just had Mars move into the sign of Cancer, creating more of that intensity around our feelings, our emotions, needing emotional security, which triggers relationship stuff, right? And so, as I mentioned before, also with Pluto in Aquarius, it's just dipping its toe in there before it retrogrades back into Capricorn in June. But we're going to have a little taste over the next couple of months of what Pluto in Aquarius is dealing with. And so and then I mentioned 2 weeks ago how Saturn is moving into Pisces. It's there. So all of these things to say, we're feeling some of the effects or influences of these big planets that even though they're generational or social, we're still feeling them, especially the Mars, which is a personal planet. And remember, Mars is the planet that drives us. It shows us what we're passionate about. It gives us motivation. It's associated with sex because it's that whole drive thing. It's that whole masculine assertion. It also is aggression as well. And so here it is in the sign of Cancer, slowing us down, maybe dealing with some passive aggressive stuff, but more so having the motivation for that emotional security that we so much seek, right? And that can show up not just in personal relationships, it can show up, we want more security emotionally if our finances feel good, if we can provide for ourselves and our family. Maybe we're looking for jobs, all of that sort of thing. And so it's feeling probably a little volatile at the moment. Now, the other thing I'm going to point to is because we're leading up to this full moon in Libra this coming week, that our relationships are in the hot spot when it's in the sign of Libra, when the moon moves into that sign of Libra as a full moon opposite Aries, because it has that tendency to say, what I want and in relationship with you, what do we want together? It doesn't always line up, especially when there's a lot of external pressures and expectations and things like that. One of the things that I'll just keep putting a little pin on the map for us to pay attention to is that with Mars in Cancer over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be really protective about where we feel we belong. We may be looking at places that we belong. If there are situations where people we consider family, whether it's chosen or it's by birth, that we may be really focused on being protective. We may have to stand up for them. And so there is a tendency also for us to get a little hot-headed if we are emotionally triggered. So it's a great time for us to learn emotional regulation right now. Working on any tasks that provide emotional satisfaction is also a way to use this energy. So something else to point to. This last week, I mentioned the relationships being up for us. It's such a beautiful, fertile cremation ground. What I mean by that is that our relationships are a way of facing ourselves. You think about it this way. When we look at the Aries energy, it's all about me. It's that independent, really driven to express ourselves in our own way, sort of going where angels dare to tread, not really thinking about somebody else. Whereas when the moon is in Libra and we have the Libra influence and energy, we're thinking about the other. We want fairness. We want balance. We want harmony. Well, sometimes it's hard to have that fairness or that balance when we're only thinking about ourselves, right? And we may be faced with a narcissistic situation, or maybe we're looking at ourselves going, I've overgiven so much in this relationship. And I don't know if the person on the receiving end of this energy that I'm giving them, this love, devotion, whatever, is feeling the same way. We're having this crisis, if you will, of wanting and expecting more and feeling like we're not getting it. And then we may do something if we're emotionally triggered that creates a little chaos, that creates a little disharmony, because what we want most is to have both, right? And so we're probably working through some of those issues. What I can say is that this conflict can create harmony. It can create solutions. If everything was hunky-dory in our lives, we would make changes. So here we are looking at ways in which we can create more stability, more harmony, more peace in our lives, in our relationships, in our emotional body, in all the things that we do. Now, I want to point out that on Monday, April 3rd, Mercury is going to enter Taurus. So now I'm moving into this week as we lead up to this full moon. And when Mercury moves into Taurus, this is a great time for us to use words and to make concrete plans, concrete ideas. We've had all these wild sort of random ideas probably over the last couple of weeks with Mercury and Aries. And now we want to put it into something tangible that's useful, that we can make decisions that make sense. And we may be better this time about not jumping to conclusions. So this is a beautiful time for some healing. Now, the downside is Mercury is going to square off with Pluto, it's now in Aquarius, right about this time. And so that can certainly create some tension in what is the idea that I really want. It's different, it's innovative, it's out of the box, and yet I need time to process it. I need to be able to allow myself the space to be able to understand deeply what's really trying to be communicated, what's really trying to be learned in this process in order to feel more secure. That's what we're looking for. You know, our thoughts and our emotions are tied together. How often do we feel something and we create a story around it? Or how often does something come in and information comes in and it triggers an emotion? So these two are fine fellows. And when Mercury's in Taurus, we're going to be looking at ways in which we can maybe rebuild or repair some of the damage that has been done in the relationship sector for us, especially if leading up to this full moon, there's been tension or there's been worries or fears, or there's been something that showed up that is labeled as conflict, if you will. By the time the full moon shows up on Wednesday, that's April 5th, that we will also have the sun canoodling with Chiron, Mercury sextiling with Saturn in Pisces. So Mercury and Taurus sextiling Saturn in Pisces. So we're going to have the sun in Aries conjunct or canoodling Chiron. This is another emphasis on how we can let go and release any sort of expectation that has kept us in a fixed idea of how we think the relationship should be, or how we should show up, or how the other person should show up in relationship for us. Now, I'm not talking about toxicity. If you're in a toxic relationship, this is a time where you finally go, I'm letting it go because this doesn't serve me. My wounds are way up here. And this relationship is done in scratching those wounds. However, for those of us who are in relationship where our wounds are being scratched and we're with a partner who can stay with us, that doesn't mean that they don't have their own issues, but we can start to work through and create some security for ourselves and say, you know what, just because conflict shows up doesn't mean we have to run away. This is a beautiful time for that. Decisions that we make now can last a long time. I want to also point out, look at a pattern or something that may have occurred 6 months ago when there was a new moon in Libra. When that shows, when you kind of make that connection, you could find that there's a beautiful healing that takes place where it's like, okay, let's say the new moon in Libra back in September caused me to overreact to something, or my partner, business or personal, created a scenario of an anxiousness in me, or created a scenario of avoidant, which triggered my anxiety, whatever. Then now you find a new way to relate to each other, that there's the conflict, but you're not running from each other, or you're not pushing each other aside, or you're not being deceptive or whatever, right? So just think about the patterns that may show up here, and notice that at this full moon, it's an opportunity to do it differently. So I'll come back to the conflict that you may have experienced in relationship over the last couple of weeks. It's there to be able to make you choose to not make you, but to offer the invitation to choose differently, to say, wait a minute, in the past, I'd run, or in the past, I'd fight, right? That fight, flight, or freeze. Now I'm going to abide. I'm going to stay secure within myself, and I'm going to ask questions. I'm not going to make assumptions. I'm going to give myself over to being uncomfortable with the feelings that I'm feeling and talk about it and invite the other person to listen, invite the other person to reveal more of themselves. This is a very revealing full moon, and how you feel about someone or how they feel about you, how you guys navigate the next stages of your relationship. There also may be times where we look at how we have interpreted or interacted with the ideas of relationship. Again, I will say this, and this is a generalized statement, but for us hopeless romantics, we have a way of going, well, relationships should look like this, or it should look like that. And if I'm not in that kind of relationship, we'll call it the Cinderella happily ever after. If I'm not in that kind of relationship, well, then it's not working. And what I will say is there's no one way to do relationship. There is your way of doing relationship, and it's up to you and your partner to figure that out. The other thing I will say that you can really help with within relationship moving forward is if you're in the middle of processing something with your partner or with somebody who you care deeply about, try not to share it with your friends until you've processed it with a third party professional or your beloved, because your friends are always going to try and protect you. They're not neutral, they're biased. And they're going to go, oh, well, you should do this and you should do that, or he or she is, a terrible human because they are doing it this way, or blah, blah, blah. Nobody else is in that relationship but you and that other human. So give yourself over to process it with that person or that third party. And then after the fact, after you've processed it, after you and your beloved have come back on the same terms and made your decisions, then you can share it with your friends. So I offer that as a tool because I can tell you that being in the business that I'm in, so many people are looking for reassurance. They're looking for opinions. They're looking for someone to take their side. And a neutral party doesn't take sides, but your friends will. And what they'll do is they'll plant seeds of doubt. They'll plant seeds of insecurities or fears or worries, that sort of thing, that may not be true. So that's the rule of thumb that I would say, especially leading up to the full moon this coming week. Please keep your relationships that are precious to you sacred. And then in the expression of sacredness, then share it with your friends or your loved ones that can't be neutral after the fact. All right, you guys, I hope this helps. Please like, subscribe, share, comment. Come find me at jamiedawn.com, and I look forward to working with you. Have such a great week.